We all want to do what's best for our reptiles. With many divided opinions saying one way is the best way, you may be wondering what substrate style truly is the best. So I had an idea. What if I gave an unbiased review of different substrate styles after experiencing them over a long period of time? Then I could give an unbiased pros and cons of each style. So I've been running an experiment. I've been given 3 snakes and 3 different setups with 3 different substrate styles. These 3 styles are Bioactive, Playsand Topsoil Mix and Lignocil. We're going to go through what some of my personal experiences with each, some of the good points and some of the drawbacks of each substrate, so that by the end of this video you should be able to make a better decision as to which substrate works best for you. So let's go back when all this started. I've got 3 snakes, 1 California kingsnake and 2 Mexican black kingsnakes. Now my upper Mexican black kingsnake I put on the Lignocil. My lower Mexican black kingsnake I put on the Playsand Topsoil Mix. And the California kingsnake has been on Bioactive for the past year. Going into this, I was looking for one thing from each of these substrates. The substrates had to allow the snake to express the natural behaviour to dig. It didn't matter how naturalistic the substrate itself was, all that mattered was that the snake was allowed to express natural behaviour. First, let's look at my Lignocil setup. Now this substrate was purchased from my local reptile shop for £20 for a big 12 kg bag. I put in a generous amount because I wanted that depth to allow the snake to dig. The very first thing that I noticed was how well this substrate held the form of the burrows. Not only did it hold form, but it also held form long enough for these tunnels to be reused by the snake, not just a one-time thing. Now normally, snakes will dig for security reasons or to reach a humid microclimate. Now with this substrate, it's highly moisture absorbent, which means obviously it's not going to have any humid microclimate underneath it. It is what it is that shavings. But most snakes should probably have a humid hide anyway, so it's questionable how important that really is with the substrate if it has a humid microclimate in access anyway. When it came to cleaning, I found this to be the easiest substrate to clean. I could just get a handful of it, it absorbed all the feces and urates. I could get my hands around, get a big clump of substrate from around the area and just bin that. And then I could just get a handful from the bag and replace what I took out. Simple as that. When I'm doing full cleans, I simply just bag it in a bin bag and done. Whereas with the topsoil, it's harder to actually get all of that substrate out. There's always going to be that little bit stuck in the corner, and that isn't the case with the Lignocil. The Lignocil generally, because it's not a soil itself, it's not stuck in the corners, and generally you just sweep it out and it's done. I think in terms of the keeper, this was the easiest substrate to work with. It is, however, it's incredibly messy and it gets everywhere. It's not like soil where if you drop it, it just plops onto the floor where it fell. This stuff is like confetti. If it falls, it dissipates everywhere. Luckily for me, I have laminate flooring, so it's easily just vacuumed or just swept up. But I know those that keep carpet hate it getting in their carpets, so that's something to consider. Now during the same time, I was keeping the snake below that with the topsoil and Playsand mix. This mix was probably 80% topsoil to 20% Playsand. The first bonus of this substrate was that it's cheap, but more importantly, I think it's a safer option in terms of biosecurity. Now let me explain. A $2.99 bag of topsoil and a similarly priced bag of Playsand, from regular shops like The Range or Tesco, it's not from the reptile industry, which means that hasn't been stored anywhere near snake mites, or it's at least a low chance to have been. Whereas the Lignocil that I got from my reptile shop, one that was made by Habitat, and it comes from the reptile industry, so there's a chance it's around snake mites to some degree. And then it was also stored at the reptile shop, which means it was definitely stored around snakes. Now I left this big bag of Lignocil in the attic for like a month before I was even comfortable letting it anywhere near my reptiles. I don't want to deal with snake mites, so I take that precautionary measure to quarantine the substrate. And to be honest, a big bag like this is probably going to last me more than 6 months, ideally. It's quite easy to plan ahead and store one and just quarantine it for a month at least, when you know you've got that much to get through. You can plan this ahead. But the snake mites is something that I just don't really have to worry about with the topsoil and Playsand mix, and that's a really good bonus for that style of substrate. This style is so versatile. It can pretty much be used for nearly every species. You can either spray it to increase humidity, or you can let it dry out and use it for arid species. You can also, if you want to, shift the ratio of Playsand to topsoil to suit the needs of the species. So if you have this arid species, you can shift it closer to more Playsand, and if you're keeping a humid species, you can shift it even more to more topsoil. It's completely customizable, and that's something that I really like. But also, you will get those humid microclimates beneath the surface. The surface will dry out first, but it will lock in that humid microclimate beneath, and that is something the snake can tunnel down to. Now, in these specific examples, I did not notice Monty, which is the one on the topsoil substrate. I did not notice him dig anywhere near as much as Olivia that was on the Lignocil. Now, I don't know if that is down to the substrate or if that's down to the behavioural preferences of the actual individual snakes. In terms of cleaning the substrate, it's relatively easy. The leaf litter would pretty much catch feces normally before it even got to the substrate, and even then I would take a small handheld trowel and I would remove the feces and maybe even a small area of soil around it. Now, something that I like to do in my care is that I like to spray down the enclosures quite heavily once a week. What this does is that it stops the substrate getting dry and dusty, but there's also a behavioural reason to do it too. In the wild, a period of rainfall will be met with an increased amount of activity from the snakes. So when I spray it, they normally come out cruising and exploring after a period of a spike in humidity, essentially. The topsoil and Playsand, obviously, it allows me to do that, but the Lignocil, if I did that, it would mould. So that is an advantage the topsoil and Playsand has. Now, when doing full cleans, I find the topsoil and Playsand mixes is so much more laborious and just tedious than Lignocil. One, the substrate is actually quite heavy, especially when you use it at depth that you're actually trying to encourage digging. So there's a lot of shoveling and getting that stuff out there. But also, every little bit of organic matter has to be removed if I want to disinfect properly. Organic matter interferes with the disinfectant, so you have to remove it. And unlike the Lignocil, there's always a bit of dust or a bit of something in the corner, or it's stuck to the ceiling along the edge. So I end up having to get like a wet paper towel and run it along the edge to try and remove everything. And it gets really tedious compared to how I might do it with the Lignocil. Now, where I live, we have a garden waste collection service done by the council, but this is only for like grass clippings and branches and trimmings and things like that. They will not take soil. So that my only options to dispose of this old substrate is put it at the bottom of the garden. And what this has done is has left me with like these little mounds at the bottom of the garden. Now, if you have a lot of land, this might not be a problem for you, but for me, it is a problem. Another downside would be the topsoil, when wet, will clump and stick to things. So when I want to change my waters and clean water bowls every day, there will always be substrate or leaf litter stuck to the bottom. And in the early stages, I would hold the water bowl and I would spray the bottom to rinse off the substrate back into the enclosure. That's fine, but when you want to do this every day, it gets really repetitive and annoying fast. So what I did was I came up with a system of, I essentially made a coaster out of a piece of slate, and that kind of solved the problem. But I didn't have to spend half an hour making a little slate coaster for the Lignocil because it just doesn't stick to the bottom in that way. So that's a bonus to the Lignocil. I would have to say though that it looks a lot more natural than the Lignocil, so it's a big win in that department for how it looks. Although I did notice the snake looked like dirtier, well maybe not dirtier, but it was definitely duller than the snake in the Lignocil setup. The lack of any form of dust in the Lignocil setup meant that snake was like as glossy as ever. Now, this might be nitpicking, but as an owner of a Mexican black kingsnake, I want that jet black glossy look when I look at my snake. And it was a little bit disappointing when I didn't get that from the topsoil. Now, my final style is my Bioactive. The one thing that I really love about this setup is that cleaning is minimal. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I even saw feces. And obviously I don't do a full clean because it's Bioactive. So as a student with very little time as it is, that is a big bonus. This style involves keeping invertebrates in the enclosure in a soily substrate that when there's waste in the setup, these insects eat the waste and in turn produce their own waste, or in invertebrate terms, frass. Now this frass goes down into the substrate and is used by the plant's roots and taken up by the plants so that that nitrogen cycle is repeated. Now there's a lot of nuance to this style of keeping, and that I wouldn't really recommend this to anyone that isn't already familiar with the care of the species they're keeping anyway. You know, as great as not having to clean in this specific example is, there are drawbacks. Just like the topsoil and Playsand mix, when I want to change water bowls and go clean them, there's a lot of substrate stuck to the bottom, but not only substrate, there's actually invertebrates and springtails and isopods on the bottom, so I have to stand there and spray them down because I actually want those inverts this time, so it's even more tedious when I'm trying to make sure I don't lose any of the bugs that I want to keep. And my slate strategy didn't work because even though there might not have been substrate on the bottom, there was always bugs, so I ended up trying to spray them off anyway. So just like the other setup, it actually becomes quite tedious to have to do this every day just because I want to clean a water bowl. And that's something that in the Lignocil setup, I didn't have this problem. It was pick it up, take it away, clean it. While on the topic of invertebrates, a downside to this bioactive style is that I have noticed that invertebrates can quite annoy the snake quite a bit. There's been plenty of times where I've seen a Mario beetle like climbing over the snake or walking into its face, and that's either met with the snake flinching, moving away, or like quite violently flicking at it to get it to go away. There's one example which actually made me take things out, where I had desert millipedes in with my California kingsnake. This California kingsnake was curled up, basking in the basking spot, and this millipede was climbing down but then climbing onto the kingsnake, and it was quite irritating to the kingsnake, so the kingsnake would flick at it. The millipede clearly didn't get the memo, and he tried to climb back on again, and the snake just flicked, and the whole thing kept on repeating over and over again, the snake flicking, and to the point where the snake just left the basking spot. I don't know about you, but to me captivity should be about comfort, and I don't think keeping something in there that would stop the snake doing what it wants to do is a benefit at all. I see that as a real drawback. And I did pull those millipedes out, and they're in their own setup now. So I'm actually considering taking the beetles out too, because I don't know whether this is just invertebrates in general, if you watch for long enough they actually annoy the snake, or whether it's invertebrates over a certain size annoy the snake, because I haven't noticed the isopods getting the same reaction, or the springtails. But then again, I assume with them in enough numbers you'd get the same response as well, potentially. And then obviously I don't have any issues with disposal of substrate, because obviously I'm not doing full cleans, and I'm not even doing spot cleans actually. I have every intention of doing a spot clean if I see feces. I just do not see it. I think it's eaten like that quick. So no, I don't have to deal with buying new substrate and throwing stuff out. But it was, to be fair, it was very expensive to set up to begin with. I had very different mixes of substrates. I wanted organic content in the soil, I wanted mineral content, I wanted pockets of humidity and pockets of air in there for invertebrates to go into, and I wanted soil to be turned over by earthworms. So in the end it probably cost me around £30 to even set that up. So it kind of swings and roundabouts really. Like, it was expensive to do in the beginning, but then I didn't have to do any cleaning after. So it depends on your budget and your preferences really. But also, I don't know if you can tell by this footage, but this snake has a kink. This is how I received it. I assume it's an incubation problem or something genetic. But I don't know how much this kink physically impairs the snake to the point where it doesn't dig, because I've never seen this snake dig. The only time I've ever seen this snake either root around or dig was when I've chucked some more substrate in there and it's really loose and just a big mound on top, and she's kind of like pushed that around. But I've not actually seen any tunneling or burrowing behaviour from this snake. Again, I don't know if this is like because the substrate is so compact, or whether it's just a behavioural preference of the snake. But it would be interesting to see whether this snake would dig more on Lignocil too. So the Lignocil was the most cost effective, it was the easiest to use from the keeper's perspective, and actually it got the highest amount of digging behaviour from the snake that was in there compared to the others. Now I'm going to have to switch things around to see how different snakes interact with that. But if I see an overarching increase in digging behaviour between all the snakes, then I know that that is actually, in terms of welfare, then that might actually be better for the snake. So going forward, I'm going to phase out the topsoil and Playsand mix. I've used this for years, and I think I'm turning the bottom of my garden into a quarry with just soil everywhere, and it's not something that I see as being long-term sustainable for me as a keeper in the way that I'm keeping now. The best reptile substrate is the substrate that fits your lifestyle and your needs, your preferences and how it looks as a keeper, but also allows the animal to express their natural behaviours. You know, Bioactive is no better than keeping on shavings if it doesn't allow the animal to behave naturally. You aren't a poor keeper for using shavings, and you aren't automatically a great keeper for using Bioactive. What makes a great keeper is being able to make judgments based upon welfare and being able to assess welfare in their animals. And if you want to learn more about measuring welfare and how to develop this skill yourself, I recommend you watch this video and this video.